So, what if the very thing doctors literally always prescribe for health and vitality, physical exertion, actually disrupted your body instead of healing it? For most healthy people, physical activity is basically the ultimate reset button, right? It creates this temporary physiological stress, your body expertly adapts to it, and ultimately it restores homeostasis, making you stronger. It's an incredibly brilliant self-healing system. But there's this massive mystery box paradox when it comes to exertion. For individuals living with MECFS, that's myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome, and, increasingly those with long COVID, the script is completely flipped. Instead of bouncing back, physical, cognitive, or even emotional exertion triggers a profound, truly debilitating crash.
And this devastating crash actually has a clinical name, post-exertional malaise, or PEM. It is the absolute defining feature of both ME, CFS, and long COVID. But we really need to establish the stakes here because, frankly, the word malaise doesn't even come close to doing justice to the severity of this condition. We're talking about patients whose physiological reserve is so severely tapped out that they can crash from the most microscopic amounts of exertion. For the most severely affected bedbound patients, just sitting up, brushing their teeth, or even trying to process a conversation can trigger a massive worsening of symptoms that leaves them incapacitated for days, weeks, or sometimes even longer. They aren't just tired, their bodies are fundamentally failing to recover from basic functional tasks.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating new framework that completely reframes how we view these invisible illnesses. We're diving deep into a groundbreaking 2026 editorial from the journal Cardiovascular Diabetology. This paper takes a massive step forward by proposing a cardiometabolic perspective on post-exertional malaise. It challenges all those old definitions and gives us a totally new way to understand the biology behind the crash, shifting our focus away from simple symptom management and toward the incredibly complex, interconnected physiological systems of the human body.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the exertion paradox. Second, rethinking post-exertional malaise. Third, systems out of sync. Fourth, the cumulative cardiometabolic toll. And finally, a new research blueprint.
Okay, Section 1, the exertion paradox, when healing hurts.
To understand why exertion hurts these patients, we first have to look at what's actually supposed to happen in a healthy body. When you exert yourself, you aren't just engaging your muscles, right? You're triggering a massive, system-wide event. Your cardiovascular system pumps more blood, your endothelial cells regulate blood vessel tone, your metabolic and endocrine systems totally shift how energy is produced, your autonomic nervous system steps up, and your immune system gets involved. In a healthy person, all of these distinct systems adapt and coordinate flawlessly. Think of it like a world-class orchestra playing perfectly in tune. Every section comes in at the exact right time, playing the right notes, to ultimately restore systemic homeostasis. It's an elegant, deeply synchronized biological dance.
But what happens when the conductor of that orchestra completely loses their sheet music? That brings us to Section 2, rethinking post-exertional malaise beyond symptoms.
The authors of this paper argue that our traditional clinical view of PEM and long COVID and MECFS is way too simplistic and needs an immediate upgrade. We've got to stop viewing PEM as just this subjective feeling of fatigue or merely an exacerbation of symptoms. Instead, the researchers are proposing a huge shift in perspective. PEM is actually a profound biological failure of these interconnected systems to coordinate their recovery. It's a multi-system disruption. So instead of restoring homeostasis, exertion in these patients causes these systems to lose their synchronization. It's not just that the systems are tired, it's that they are fundamentally failing to communicate and operate on their correct timelines.
All right, Section 3. Systems out of sync, the dysynchronization. Let's look closer at exactly how this unfolds. This is where we get into the absolute core science of the paper. And honestly, it completely changes how we should be looking at patient testing. Normally, after exertion, your various physiological systems spike, but then gracefully curve back down together to meet at a baseline of homeostasis. Absolute green homeostatic harmony. But for a patient experiencing PEM, those post-exertional trajectories become wildly divergent and just completely chaotic. The cardiovascular, metabolic, and immune systems scatter in completely different directions and just fail to return to baseline. The orchestra is completely out of tune.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how the orchestra gets out of sync across different periods of time. Because physiological adaptation doesn't just happen all at once.
autonomic, vascular, and hemodynamic adjustments, which is basically how your blood flows, happen within seconds or minutes of exertion. But inflammatory signaling and metabolic regulation, those unfold over hours or even days. If autonomic adjustments happening in seconds clash with metabolic regulation happening over days, it creates pure chaos. This means the timing of clinical assessment becomes absolutely critical. If a doctor only tests a patient an hour after exertion, they might completely miss the metabolic and immune crash that happens 2 days later. When we measure is just as important as what we measure.
Moving on to Section 4, the cumulative cardiometabolic toll, the vicious cycle. This desynchronization isn't just a temporary inconvenience. We really need to look at the long-term consequences here because it takes a severe toll on the body. The paper details hard objective evidence of this disturbance. Patients aren't just feeling unwell, their bodies are showing concrete, measurable abnormalities. We're talking reduced stroke volume and cardiac output, meaning the heart isn't pumping efficiently. There's impaired blood flow to the brain and severe endothelial dysfunction affecting the blood vessels. And what's incredibly important to note here is that these cardiovascular abnormalities in ME/CFS often become far more apparent under orthostatic challenge, like say a tilt table test, than when the patient is just resting. The dysfunction hides at rest but reveals itself the exact moment the system is forced to adapt.
The reality for folks with ME, CFS, and long COVID is that they go through recurrent cycles of this. They exert themselves, they crash, they experience a prolonged physiological disturbance, and then it happens all over again. These recurrent, vicious cycles of crashing aren't just transient periods of feeling worse. By constantly throwing these physiological systems out of sync, these repeated episodes might actually be fundamentally altering a patient's cardiometabolic adaptation over the long term. It creates this heavy, cumulative biological burden on the body.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, a new research blueprint looking to the future.
This new mechanistic framework, viewing PEM as a desynchronization of cardiometabolic systems, completely changes the blueprint for clinical trials moving forward. To truly understand the biological heterogeneity of PEM, future studies absolutely have to factor in a patient's underlying cardiometabolic health profile. We can't treat all long COVID or ME/CFS patients as a monolith, right? Pre-existing health matters immensely. If a patient already has obesity or type 2 diabetes, their metabolic baseline is already altered. We have to evaluate how those pre-existing conditions influence those chaotic post-exertional trajectories we talked about earlier. By stratifying patients based on these factors, we get a much clearer picture of how and why these systems are failing to synchronize.
And this opens up some incredibly exciting therapeutic doors. If PEM is rooted in cardiometabolic pathways, well then we can look at repurposing established cardiometabolic therapies. Treatments like metformin or GLP-1 receptor agonists are being highly explored right now because of their proven ability to modulate these exact physiological pathways across the metabolic, endothelial, and immune systems. And this isn't just a fun theory. Major initiatives like the NIH Recover TLC program and the LOTUS-TD trial are actively stepping into this therapeutic space to see if these drugs can actually help coordinate the systems back in the harmony.
I want to wrap up this explainer by leaving you with this final, genuinely provocative question taken directly from the researchers. Does this recurrent dysregulation fundamentally contribute to a cumulative cardiometabolic burden over a patient's lifetime? It really urges all of us, researchers, clinicians, and the public, to completely rethink the severe, long-term biological impacts of ME/CFS and long COVID. By moving beyond just looking at symptoms and instead focusing on how interconnected systems adapt or fail to adapt over time, we are finally stepping closer to solving the exertion paradox. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this vital research.